My dad was from India, as people can tell from my name, but he had this saying, right? He used to say to me, Ajay, you don't eat an elephant in one sitting. My first question to him is, why are we eating elephants? Anyways, but the point being, to eat an elephant, you have to take small bites to accomplish that goal. The journey starts with the first step, but it's often 10,000 steps to get to that destination. So don't think this is a miracle cure in a bottle, what I'm sharing with you. It's going to take time. But the first step is actually talking to people, making yourself known, and telling what you can help them with and what you can do. Once you key in on what they need, guess what? They're perked up and they know that you're listening to them. As my old mentor used to say to me in my first job, Ajay, sell them what they want to buy, not what you want to sell.
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, SoEnergy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.
Ajay, welcome to the show.
Nelson, it's wonderful to be here with you. And I've been looking forward to this podcast and for a long time. So I'm really happy to be here with you.
I know we were just reflecting back on how we were both at an event in Brussels. And actually, it was so much fun. After the event, it was the speakers hanging out in the hotel bar, probably for much longer than we should have. But it was great fun talking about all things life and learning.
Yes, I think you and I have some overlap and commonalities in what we're thinking. And so I think our connection we really connected over, especially, I guess, a few of those wonderful beverages in Belgium to make things work. So yes, I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation here with you.
One of the things I didn't get to ask you, Ajay, is why did you do the crazy thing of writing a book? As someone who wrote one and massively underestimated writing a book before I started to write it, and I'm not too sure I'll ever do it again because of the amount of effort it took. But what made you write this book, and what particular about learning metrics, right? What was the kind of trigger?
This is my fourth book. With the first three were with Wiley and Sons, and the last one was called Trainer's Balance Scorecard, and it was around how to account for learning around performance management, which I do speak to in the keynote that we met at a bit. But I really realized that we need to become a little more tangible. In this book with Kogan Page and the learning metrics, what we decided to do is become really proactive, really relevant and practical in how we approach this. And really what it comes down to is how do we become accountable, tangibly accountable to the decision makers within the organization. And hence the inspiration is basically learning is just another business function within operations. And so all business functions that are accountable, we seem, when I say we, the global we as learning, seem to be having challenges to prove our worth and how to make that happen. And so learning metrics, and essentially I do go down a rabbit hole in the book with this one, is how do we connect and make that conversation happen that is real, relevant, and make sure that we're speaking in the same language as the decision makers when we're making our decisions about what learning that we need to deploy within the organization, and make sure, more importantly, how people are actually able to apply it. Because I like to say, it's never about the learning, it's all about the doing. And because learning is just a vehicle to get to the destination. I know you believe in that as well. So that's where the inspiration came up. So
absolutely, right. Now, the magic formula for me is learning applied equals profit. That's the holy grail that we need to aspire to. But when you're writing this, Ajay, and obviously you must meet many learning professionals, and I'm sure you did ahead of the book, but why is it such a challenge? Why do we in L&D struggle to connect those dots and tell the story of business value?
I have a few theories on this, and I could be a little bit direct here. And I don't make a lot of friends with these statements. So I apologize in advance to listeners. And it really, let me qualify what I'm about to say. It's more about a little bit of a tough love rather, and I really believe in learning and development, so I don't want people to take this the wrong way. First of all, we don't understand the business side of things. And I've always said, as back in the day, 50 years ago, when they created MBA programs for engineers, I believe there's got to be more of an incorporation of business accountability, financial accountability, understanding. I don't need any learning L&D people to be experts in this topic. That's not their role. Their expertise is in learning, but I need them to be literate, as with every other business function that's not directly correlated to the primary operations of the business. And so in that context, I believe that L&D people, if they really want to be successful today, and they really want to make that accountability and connection with their business leaders or other decision makers within the organization, they need to become business and, dare I say, financially literate and understanding how to speak to these people. Because I employ this analogy. Basically, when you travel to another country, you, at least as a tourist, you try to learn some of their language or their culture to integrate yourself a little bit to understand, and they'll welcome you better. Guess what? L&D, you're not in your own country. Maybe you're in your own state or province within your department, but you're within the country of the business. And so make yourself more welcoming to them and understand what they're trying to accomplish, not what you're trying to accomplish. As my old mentor used to say to me in my first job, Ajay, sell them what they want to buy, not what you want to sell. And I think really what that comes down to is you have to appeal to their needs and solve their problems. And I think where it comes down to, if I conclude on this, is if anybody has a takeaway today from this podcast, just learn some of the basic business elements. Even if you take a few basic accounting courses or financial courses or something, do that just to get into their heads.
I do want to go a bit more deeper on that, Andrew, because that's one of the things that stood out even when I was at your keynote, right? It's this idea that you can't really speak business until you understand business, right? And there are like certain fundamentals that you need to know about how a business operates and what a business's priorities are in order for you to be able to do work that's going to align with those priorities. And so, on that note of kind of core things you think someone needs to understand, what are they?
So one is understand the direction the business wants to take itself. And you and I understand this as the mission of the organization. I meet L&D people on a regular basis that said, I'm not sure where I should focus my efforts or where I should allocate my money to. If you have no clue of where direction, number one, you have a problem, and it's not them, it's you. I hate to sound like an old dating cliche, but it's not them, it's you. And at the end of the day, the mission is the guiding North Star to the organization. And I always say, if when an organization, and most do, have an effective mission, a statement or vision and mission statement together, and their values, you in that little bubble of messaging, you will find all of the key elements that they're focusing on. Because let's remind people here that the mission vision comes from the, I hate to dare say this, but the military, right? It comes from war. It comes from we need to accomplish a certain goal and we can't deviate from that because we're just wasting resources. So organizations have adapted that. So within that message, you have all the elements where you need to focus on. Now that's the 50,000 foot or level of direction. Now, where do we take that? Take it a step down. Those things are linked to performance metrics. And those are not you're not just responsible for performance, the organization is responsible for performance. And there's three things in that, and maybe I'm going too far down the rabbit hole here, but let me just share the three things with you. Decision makers, if you're worried about what they're worried about, if you're worried about what they're worried about, there's three things that they're always worried about. That's managing risk, managing change, and managing performance. And these are not mutually exclusive, they're all interrelated. So, when you're managing risk, that's the first question. It's the what if questions. What if this doesn't work? What if this happens? Whatever. So you got to be able to answer this question. It's not them being negative, it's more them being realistic. Like their necks are on the line. You're telling them you can do something and making a promise. Make sure you've answered in their questions. That risk means that you're making a change or they're making a change and you're helping facilitate that change and they need to manage that. Performance is, so the change is how. So first is what if, that was how do we do it? And the performance is when will we arrive? So that's where learning really embraces itself. So those are the three areas we need to look at. And performance, I always say when you're in school and the teacher gave you the answers to the upcoming test or quiz, you'd be thrilled. But the one problem is that the teacher didn't tell you what questions they were going to ask. So now you need to know what questions to ask them. So performance metrics is where you need to find, they've already developed the answers. You just need to ask the right questions. And then finally, connected or financial accountability, because like you just said it, right? The doing is the profit, right? The bottom line. Now, we may not be correlated directly to profit because we're considered a cost center. And I would love to have that discussion with you later. But the cost center emblem is not an embarrassment. It's actually, you should wear it with pride because it shows you how you should manage performance. And I guess we'll get down to that. But it's those three elements that I think L&D people should need to embrace and learn and make. If they just do that, and they'll be like way ahead of the curve here when they're impressing their stakeholders.
And what does that journey look like, Andrew? Instead of, okay, I want to connect what I'm doing
Yeah.
in L&D with financial performance. Where do I start? What do you recommend I do?
So simple things. I know people, I'm talking really up here and high. Let's bring it down a level to what you're asking, Nelson. When I tell people, here's a primary example of what I used to do. Maybe you will still do it on occasion. I would get a call from the L&D people, or better yet, rarely would L&D call me. It was always like the operations. I remember one time there was this operation director, I think it was the CEO, I'm not sure, but it's going back a number of years. He says, Ajay, you got to come in and talk to our learning department. I'm like, why? He goes, they don't get it. So first thing I did is I went into the office, met the L&D. First of all, there's a really negative because a little barrier because the operating officer called me in to talk to you. And I said, look, I'm not here to make enemies. I'm here to make friends and to make you look good. So let's start with that premise. Number two, let's go on a field trip. What's the issue here? Let's go and meet a few people in the organization. And when I say people, I'm talking about your internal customers. They're the people paying for your solutions. If they're your customers, you need to understand their problems. So let's go meet with the director of manufacturing or director of marketing or whomever is asking you to and ask, just be their therapist and learn about their problems. Because at the end of the day, they have accountability to meeting performance expectations. And they know what those performance expectations are, right? Their feet are held to the fire. So now you say to them, look, let's talk about that. Where do I fit in? Or maybe you can find in that discussion where you may fit in. And then you now are being an investigator and say, okay, this is where learning development can help you if you haven't done that already. And now what are you hoping to achieve? What are those metrics that you have to achieve in the next month, next 6 months, next year? What are those benchmarks? And what are the other elements that are fitting into that? Because I know L&D people like to believe that they are God's gift to organizations, but let's be in real world scenario. There are a lot of many cogs in the wheels in the organization that may impact or affect what you propose. And so make sure you understand those connections within that solution that you're thinking about. Once you know that, you know their budget, you know their performance expectations, you know some very tangible elements. You do what you do best, right? You pull out of your tool bag that needs assessment, that skills assessment, and you come out and you do your investigations with the department or the staff, and you find out what do they know, what don't they know, what should they know, what are they expected to know in the future, right? All these little elements. And once you take that inventory and you know the performance expectations, you now can deploy your resources and learning development more effectively. You can now say, okay, this is where I need to target it. This is how much I can do, and this is a time frame. I try to make simplify, and I don't want people to take away that this is a simple process. The journey starts with the first step, but it's often 10,000 steps to get to that destination. So don't think this is a miracle cure in a bottle, what I'm sharing with you. It's going to take time. And but the first step is actually talking to people, making yourself known, and telling what you can help them with and what you can do. Because as soon as you key in, remember what I said just before, my boss said, sell them what they want to buy, not what you want to sell. Once you key in on what they need, guess what? They're perked up and they know that you're listening to them. I don't know about you, Nelson. I have a wife who's my business partner. She's my co-author, Teresa Kirkwood. And we've been in a relationship a very long time. It's going on 32 years here together. And we've written books, we work together, but we've learned to understand and read each other. And it has mitigated the arguments and the cold shoulders. Similar things happen in organizations, right? Departments are looking at L&D and saying, you didn't deliver what you promised, so I don't know if I'm going to go back to you. There's that cold shoulder, right? Or they yell back at you, said, you didn't deliver, you get the blame. So there's the argument, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that communication issue. And basically, it really comes down to that understanding and communication is very key. But those are the proactive elements I would start with.
And you can definitely see the difference when you do it right. Recently, there's an organization we've started working with. And what was really incredible is before we decided to sign the contract and they were working with us, the CEO wanted to have a chat. And I had a chat with the CEO. And what was incredible was the narrative alignment between the head of L&D and the CEO, because it wasn't about we need more content or we need to increase learning hours. Actually, their problem was quite clear. They were a hyper growth company. They're bringing in a lot of new talent into the organization who they need to be able to make sure are role ready and they can execute and deliver the objectives they need in the business. And in the sales team, they were diversifying their products and they needed to make sure that they were building specialisms that needed support. And so it was and what was incredible was that's exactly what the L&D champion had told us. And it was quite refreshing to hear that was the kind of L&D mission in some sense, which is quite aligned to the business mission of what we need to get to be able to deliver our strategy. And it made a
100%.
massive difference.
100%. You said it. That's all they're looking for is the achieving their end results.
Yeah.
A number of years ago, I won't name the company, but it's this is a number of years ago, but it's one of our proudest moments. It was a large fruit name company, I'll put it that way. We won't name names. Anyways, but this is 15 years ago now. And this is prior to any type of a real AI or any type of thing coming out. And anything, even back then, it was when we talked about big data, it was called big data, but nobody really understood it. And what we did is like they understood that the L&D department was very proactive in that company. And it was so the mission was, everybody knows who the CEO is now, but anyways, the CEO said they were told that they would never be numbered by Consumer Reports. They would never be number one in customer service. At the time, the customer service was crap. And of course, that CEO, it was like you're putting a red flag in front of a bull. It was like a challenge, right? So he said, we're going to become number one within 5 years. 3 to 5 years. Whoa, that's a tough mountain to climb. So what do most companies will do? To your point, Nelson, they will shove people on a bunch of customer service courses, or L&D will develop a bunch of customer service management courses, build a library, run through all the e-learning, run through all the courses, whatever, and see if you know the skills, right? And hope for the best. It's like spaghetti on a wall. Throw on the wall, see what sticks, and hopefully something happens and magic will happen. That's not how they work. They actually did a pre-analysis, and they did in the department, in the customer support department, they did that's where we stepped in. They did assessments and quizzes. So they preloaded the data. And they said to Nelson is sitting there answering calls and said, okay, how do you connect this device with this device or whatever? And if Nelson was not adequate in understanding how to answer the question, he would and they put scenarios in these quizzes and these tests, and they're feeding it to a system. And there was 8,000 employees at the time in that department. And they were just feeding that data in. And then what they did with that data, L&D, they would analyze, okay, where's Nelson's weakness, and not just Nelson, but Ajay and whoever else is working in the department. Where's their thing? Then backing it out and saying, okay, where do we need to identify the weaknesses? So we're not just going to shove Nelson in a customer service program and because he didn't answer Ajay's question properly. It's more like, how does he understand our business to make sure he answers the question to the customer? So Nelson had trouble with X to Y in connecting devices. And now, so what do you do next? Okay, don't shove Nelson into a course or connect, that product. It's okay, how do we serve Nelson more properly here? How do we get Nelson to understand and make that connection? Do we do a one-on-one coaching? Do we do simulations? Do we have him do real-time or scenarios that he can role plays that he can help do this? But all those are very proactive. So Nelson fixed that, right? We fixed that with Nelson. Now he's done, but now we iterate. Where else is Nelson and whoever else is? And so it becomes, and again, I hate to use this analogy, but it's rather than carpet bombing the department with one course or a couple of courses, it's targeted sniperism. It's really targeting exactly what you need to know and get you on and doing what you need to do. And guess what? I'm cutting the story short because you're saying that's short, Ajay? Okay. But they became number one in customer service. To this day, that company, and I'm sure people know who I'm talking about, but when I call in, I have a MacBook that's 10 years old. I was using it the other day. I called in, I said, I'm not under any support. I just gave away the company. And I said, I'll pay for whatever service you need to support. He goes, no, we'll help you out. They call it, fix the problem, and on my way. A 10-year-old computer. But that just shows how invisible L&D is in the back end, but how tangible and direct and focused that they're connecting within the business. So they're not an afterthought.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like L&D is invisible, but the results are very visible. They're visible in the way we perform and we do our job. It reminds me of a story of actually their close competitor at Microsoft, right? When Satya Nadella joined one of the best track records as a CEO at a company. But one of the early things was at the time where he joined, they were stagnant in share price and not much innovation coming out of it. And I remember the exact thing he was picking out there was essentially symptoms of a fixed mindset, right? There was either the fear of we can't try something and get it wrong, or there just wasn't the mindset to try things. And the kind of specific thing he picked out was we need to shift this to a growth mindset. And then it became a laser focus around how do you operationalize growth mindset, and that's really where the L&D team come in, right? Like it's not, there's a bit of 0 to 1 structured learning and courses for everyone to understand what growth mindset is, but then there is the manager coaching, and how does the manager kind of coach and shape that performance and have the feedback cycle to constantly keep people on track. There's a cultural change that L&D can influence and contribute to. But that's a great example again, right? And the rest is history of what that company was able to do by shifting to a more kind of growth orientated mindset. But it's another example of what you're saying there.
Let me just share with you very quickly, because I know you want to take this into a further direction, but very quickly, and you shared an example of a smaller company that's entrepreneurial and growing, and one of your customers. And that's like the holy grail for L&D. Oh my God. And they're saying we don't have the resources, we're growing, we're a small company. No, that's when all the learning is happening. You don't want to be the Fortune 50 when it's being stagnant, right? That's when you're excited. But I'll just share, I shared the Fortune 50 companies or Fortune 500 companies. Look at the successful ones. You and I can name the most successful companies in the world on one or two hands. And what makes them successful? A lot of things, but it's the invisibility of L&D in the background. Now, I'm going to name a few, and people need to look into this. I won't go into it in the podcast, but Toyota, you talk about operations. Their operations around this lean Six Sigma, right? Operations to make their efficiencies and highest quality. How do you do that? One of the things they did is stop the production line when something was wrong. I used to work as a student on the General Motors production line here in Canada for the summer. And I remember my equipment started defecting, but cars kept on going by without my parts. But Toyota, if I was at Toyota, I get to stop the line. Now that's thousands and thousands of dollars of lost production when me stopping production line. But what Toyota do? They didn't just fix it. They brought their team in and said, let's learn from this. So L&D was there. Okay, that's another example. Starbucks. I mean, I don't know how impressed you are, but I'm always impressed when I go to Starbucks. Now, I'm not going to be a shill for Starbucks here, but when I sit in front of that menu, which is already a semi-customized menu, people don't realize that. And within 3 minutes, I get my coffee consistently. It doesn't matter where I'm in London, if I'm in New York, if I'm in Montreal or Toronto, I get the same exact coffee. But furthermore, the person in front of me, let's call him Nelson. I'm just teasing you, Nelson, but let's call him Nelson. He decides to further customize the coffee into a skinny, frothy almond milk, whatever soy latte with everything else in it. And the barista delivers that same product within 2-3 minutes. Like,
yeah,
if you don't
incredible.
realize the power of L&D that's fully integrated into that, then you're missing something. So anyways, I'm just getting a little excited.
Yeah, no, I completely see that Starbucks example. And it always amazes me when you look at any of those kind of multinational and the experience is exactly the same wherever you go. And it's phenomenal to think about the level of
L&D is not an
enablement.
afterthought. That's the thing.
Yeah,
The L&D is not an afterthought like in all these other companies who are wishing they were them. It's a fully integrated part of the operations. It's part of their culture. And that's one big obstacle, I would say, for a lot of companies wanting to make that switch. It's got to be a cultural shift. And
There's so many examples. One that came to my mind recently, it's been in the news. Disham, I don't know if you're familiar with it, Ajay, but it's like a group of restaurants that was started out in London. Recently, LMBH have bought a share on it, valuing it at 300 million. But what's incredible is this is 10 restaurants that you've got, mainly around the UK and about to come to the US. But I've been to like multiple branches, and just the level of service is incredible. And I had to ask one day, I was like, how are you guys all so good? Well, the experience, the care, the attention to detail, the hospitality. And they were just talking about the experience of what goes in to even things like making sure it's an Indian restaurant, making sure everyone is aware of the culture and the heritage behind the dishes they're serving, regardless of what their background is. And spending time on someone, and that's done, partly through kind of workshops and training, but other by experiencing things, right? So they take them to places to experience the culture so they can soak it in, so they can bring that hospitality. And I think that's what happens when you're looking at learning through the lens of connecting it to performance. I think it's a forcing function for you being creative with what the learning experience looks like, right? It's when you're trying to tick a box, you tick a box of a course because it's an easy thing to do. But when you're actually trying to influence performance, it drives the creativity around what does this experience need to be in order to drive that performance.
When you understand where you need to go, and not in learning in the business, right? We've said this at the beginning, you and I, and this is where I think you and I overlap big time. We have that same core philosophies that we can't get to a destination unless we know where we're going. And it's not about the destination LE has always been, okay, we have to build a course. That's not the destination. The destination is what does a business need to get out of it? What is that role? And when I say business, I'm not talking about the whole business. I'm talking about that one department, like you mentioned, like what that one area that needs improvement. You're not, my dad was from India, as people can tell from my name, but he had this saying, right? He used to say to me, Ajay, you don't eat an elephant in one sitting. My first question to him is, why are we eating elephants anyways? But the point being, to eat an elephant, you have to take small bites to get to accomplish that goal. So why are you trying to tackle the whole company? You need to look at those small little wins, to your point in your example. And that makes the difference. That really makes, and those small wins will get you a long way.
For sure. I do want to get to looking at just defining some of those metrics, right? We know what those vanity metrics are, and often we've spoken about it on this show around, when we're talking about number of courses we've created or programs we've run, quite often what we're trying to do is we can't prove value, therefore we're trying to prove effort, right? And we're trying to say, look, I am doing a job, I'm doing a good job, but I just can't tell you what the positive outcome is of what I'm doing. If they're the vanity metrics, tell me what are those good metrics that every L&D team should be tracking and really know about? Give me a few examples of those core metrics.
Okay. So in the book, people will expect that I'm going to focus on, when it says learning metrics, I'm looking at metrics that focus on learning. I do, but it's not what people think. So it's not like, how many courses did we do? How many people pass through the learning course? No, nobody cares about that crap. Really, nobody cares about that crap. I'm going to be very direct with people here. You go up to a director of any department and say, hey, 5 out of 9 people went through our courses. They're going to go, okay. And I always work I'm a CPA here in Canada. Actually, I'm proud to say I'm a fellow at a CPA in Canada. And we're brainwashed to say, so what and why? The so what is, so what do I care if 5 out of 9 people went through your course? What I care about is what is delivered. So what are those metrics? So the metrics could be, my metrics, the learning metrics that I always tell people to do is look at their performance metrics and make those your own. So embrace them. So if one of their performance metric is to, here's a simple example. I remember a couple of years ago, it was to reduce defects in their product in the production department, right? Now, I'm going to make this example relatively simple. It's more complex in the real world, but say their target is 10% reduction within the next 12 months. Okay, let's first of all, before we start retraining people on how to make these products, let's ask the department and the people in the department, okay, why do we have these defects? The why part, the why question, and find out what's going on. And it could be something like a new piece of equipment came in. Okay, new piece of equipment came in, people are operating it. They got training from the manufacturer of that piece of equipment. Okay, then why aren't the employees operating that equipment properly? So I'm going down that investigative hole. So to get to that 10% target, right? So if they're training equipment, maybe they weren't trained adequately, or maybe you find something in the process that there's 2 things here. Either they weren't trained properly or the process hasn't been adapted properly. So you as an LD need to decide, okay, is it a learning issue or a training issue, or is it a process issue? If it's a process issue, back away. And then come in afterwards, they fix the process to help them learn the new process. But until they fix the process, that's not your purview. You need to step back and let them deal with that. Now, let's assume they did all that. Now we need to relearn, right? They need to relearn. So we teach them, we find out what they need to do and accomplish and take all those steps. And we find out in those steps, they make certain mistakes. And that's what causing the return on defects. Okay, so let's go down a little further here. Now we get them, find out exactly what they need to learn in that process specifically. So if Ajay needs to produce 10 widgets an hour, okay, is Ajay making 10 widgets an hour? He's doing 7 or 8. Why is he doing 7 or 8 when he should be doing 10? Actually, should be achieving 12 if he's doing it properly. Okay, I go down that rabbit hole, right? So as I learn why that employee is not working properly, then I get into those very specific metrics for that employee to achieve those targets, right? So now I get very specific targets of production for that employee, and I fix that. And then as the process goes on, I'm improving all these little elements, but in the bigger grand scheme of things. Now, again, let me step back a step. I'm jumping around here a little too much, but step back. How does that person learn? Do I need to shove them into the course? Do I need to have a person coach them or train them? Do I need to have a real-time learning help desk tool in front of them that they can access immediately to say, okay, I forgot how this step, how do I learn this step, and just access that learning in an instant, and I can go back and apply it within 30 seconds, right? Whatever those tools are, and today technology, as of course, how now, technology has permitted us and afforded us a bevy of ways to solve learning problems. So I go through this process. Now, as I do all these very little steps, and trust me on this, once you accomplish these little steps, that 10% we're achieving, what is the 10% within a quarter? What, that expectation, what's the 10% in a month? What's that metric? And if I can prove my worth that I've improved this, that within that quarter, the 10% should, it says 3% within a quarter should be improved, and I've helped them achieve 2% improvement to 3%, I still look like a hero.
Yeah.
And I can go back and say, okay, and remember I said at the beginning, people need to remind themselves that learning is not the only people involved. There's other elements. So there might be other elements involved, processes, other suppliers, parts coming in, whatever the case may be, but there's other elements that I need to take account for that may be impeding or affecting my learning deployment. And so once I take that account, that way, if I'm not achieving 2%, they might say, well, you promised to help us achieve 3%. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not the hero here. I got you to 2%, but here's why we couldn't achieve the other 1%. And it's not me, it's you. There's other elements that are affecting this. And so I'll pause there for a second, Nelson, but that's really where I take the small metrics. But then if I get up to a certain point in improving it, I still look like a hero, right? Because
it's moving in the right direction, right? And I think that's it. Yeah.
Think about the consequences, right? Think about, okay, now the defects have reduced, but then the customer satisfaction level may have increased, and complaints at the customer service department may have decreased, and people be more satisfied, and maybe better sales. There's an indirect cascading effect in business of what one thing that you solve will cascade into other areas of the organization.
I love that operating principle, Ajay, that make their metric your metric, right? Like it's such a simple, but I think
why are you incredible a new metric in learning? No, seriously, like I don't get that. Why make yourself life complicated? I said the answers are out there. Use their answers and make yourself look good.
Yeah, no, I love that. Before we wrap up, Ajay, I do want to ask you, we like to ask all of our guests, I've got to the end of this episode.
We didn't get to the financials, by the way. We didn't get to the financials.
Feeling pretty motivated at this point, listening to the episode. What's that one thing I should start doing today, and that one thing I should stop doing today as an L&D professional listening to this?
Okay, the stop one is actually pretty easy. Stop looking at learning as learning. I know that's a little counterintuitive, but the learning, just like everything else, is a vehicle into the destination, right? Marketing, I use marketing as an analogy. Marketing never looks at, hey, look how well we did this campaign in marketing online or as an ad. Nobody shows them like we're 6-year-olds trying to get daddy and mommy to put the pictures on the fridge. No, they never do that. They say, look at the sales result or the increase in market share. They look at the results, marketing, right? We need to do the same thing. We can't say, hey, look at the beautiful courses that we develop. Look at the great learning experiences that people loved. They loved our course. Nobody cares if they loved your course. What the managers love is that you achieve what they're doing. So stop learning being learning and stop looking at what learning is in the doing part. So what are those in the Kirkpatrick world, right? We all know Kirkpatrick, the level 3, level 4 side of things. When you start talking in those terms with the directors, that's what you should start doing. And you need to stop talking in level 1 and 2. And I'm not saying 1 and 2 is not important. It's important for us within the context of our development of L&D. But other than that, outside our province or state, it's irrelevant. And I'm not being hard on L&D. I'm talking about every cost center in an organization. Marketing, production is a cost center. Finance and accounting is a cost center, but nobody goes around in finance and accounting. I have colleagues in accounting go around, look at how beautiful my spreadsheets are. Look how wonderful, how well organized nobody cares. What they care about, here's the spreadsheet, here's the financial statements, here's the results that you need to look at. So stop being learning and start being doing is what really I would say. And start learning about the financials. So we can get to start learning about the financials is another thing we need to look at.
Ajay, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on the show. And last thing before I let you go, where can everyone get your book?
Oh, so koganpage.com, learning metrics. I will share with you, hopefully I'll speak to them. And you know this because you're a Kogan Page author as well. They do occasionally, when I do podcasts, occasionally give you discounts. So what I'm going to try to do is share with you and your associates when you post a podcast discount code. So hopefully they'll come to the podcast, see you and me. Well,
Love it.
You're a lot more engaged. And get the discount and get the book, and that way they can see what I'm saying and what I'm rambling on about.
Love it. If Ajay can get us a Kogan Page discount, we will include it in the show notes to anyone listening to the show, so our listeners can benefit from that. Ajay, again, thank you very much for coming on the show. All the best with the book. Look forward to catching up again.
Nelson, thank you very much for having me. I look forward to maybe coming back one day. So take care.
This is how we learn now.
This episode of L&D Disrupt is brought to you by How Now, the learning platform that actually makes learning matter. Because let's face it, you could push out loads of content, track skills in a spreadsheet, drown in admin, and still not know what's working. Or you could use How Now to connect your people to the skills they need. Deliver learning in the flow of work and prove it's making a difference. That's how modern companies like Depop, Trainline, Crunchyroll, SoEnergy, Forsaven, TomTom, Investec, and so many more do it. Learn more at gethownow.com.